Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your AP Bio review of photosynthesis and respiration in preparation for your test that's coming up soon. What I'm going to do here is go over some of the things that I know will be on the AP exam, as well as items that I know will appear on your test tomorrow because I wrote it. So, without further ado, here we go with a review of photosynthesis and respiration. The first thing we didn't get time in class to talk about very much was CAM plants and C4 plants. These are alternative ways of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to start building sugars during the Calvin cycle. We'll start with the CAM plants. And basically what CAM plants do that's special is that they can close their stomata in the daytime. So if they live in a hot climate, they're not evaporating water or transpiring water out of their open holes in their leaves. They can close them up during the daytime, but then you should be saying to yourself, well, if they close their stomata, then they can't take in CO2, so they can't feed the Calvin cycle, which would mean they can't build glucose. But what they've done is done a tricky little trick where they absorb CO2 at nighttime when they can open their stomata and not lose so much water. They take in CO2 during the nighttime and they store that CO2 in a molecule that they can then use during the day when they can. So basically, it's like they just store up CO2 at night. And that's what's special about CAM plants. But it's an adaptation, evolutionary adaptation to be able to survive in a drier climate. The other type of plant that you should be very familiar with, because obviously that's an important plant, we've talked about it several times this year, corn. Corn is a C4 plant, and that's another alternative method of locking up carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. C4 plants, they basically just do different chemistry in the first step of the Calvin cycle, and it's a less water-needy first step. C3 plants, standard normal plants that we're familiar with, broadleaf trees and grass and whatever, all the normal plants that you're familiar with, those are C3 plants. They consume a lot of water. These C4 plants, one of the reasons why corn was picked to be our big food source crop is because it's a C4 plant and it needs less water than C3 plants do. So those are just some alternative ways of starting off the Calvin cycle and photosynthesis that are more water efficient. They're always talked about on the AP exam. I'm going to ask you a few questions about them tomorrow on your test. I would definitely know about CAM plants and C4 plants. Chemiosmosis is another big topic that we talked about both during photosynthesis and respiration, because chemiosmosis occurs during both of those processes. So, chemiosmosis. Basically what we're talking about with chemiosmosis is that we have a situation where we've got an electron transport chain, meaning that we dump high energy electrons into some sort of a protein. It's a protein that's in the membrane, embedded in the membrane. And notice they've got a mitochondria up on the top and they got a chloroplast on top. I really like this diagram. If you look down the labels on the diagram, it gives you a good idea of which way the electrons try to pump the hydrogen ions, and it also tells you how the hydrogen ions are then going to escape from that chamber where they've been concentrated. That process of the electron transport chain moving hydrogen ions in and then allowing these hydrogen ions to flow back out through ATP synthase, we call those two reactions the electron transport chain, that's over here, and this part would be called chemiosmosis when the hydrogen ions go flowing back out. Chemiosmosis happens during photosynthesis, and it also happens during respiration. Both involve pumping hydrogen ions into a closed compartment and then letting them flow back out through ATP synthase. So that's definitely an important overall phenomenon to understand, and it's called electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. We talked about it quite a bit in class. Make sure you understand why it's important. It's how all ATP on Earth is made, so that's definitely an important one. Okay, let's see here. Anaerobic and aerobic catabolism. Catabolism is a word maybe we haven't mentioned much yet in class, but basically that means a metabolic reaction where you're taking a large molecule and breaking it apart into smaller molecules. You can do it anaerobically or you can do it aerobically. Anaerobic is without oxygen, aerobic is with oxygen. So let's look at those a little more closely. Let's see. In respiration, the reactions of glycolysis and fermentation, those are anaerobic. Those are always paired together because you need to do fermentation to be able to continue doing glycolysis. If there's no oxygen present, it's the only way you can continue to do glycolysis is if you first do fermentation. So those two go together. They're linked together. You don't need oxygen to do those two processes together. Your other option, if there is oxygen present, you can do full-on respiration. We like full respiration. Full respiration is going to yield more ATP per glucose. So if you look at this little diagram I just threw up there, this is sort of interesting as well. In the diagram here we've got, over on the left side, this is all anaerobic. Okay. And you'll notice that you have to dump 2 ATP in, but you get 4 ATP produced out. So your net gain is 2 ATP over here. And then over on the right side, if you follow the left side, if you're a human, you go this way, and we do lactic acid fermentation so that we can continue to do more glycolysis. If you are a yeast, you do this one. You do alcoholic fermentation, which we talked about briefly in class. That's going to give us things like cellulosic ethanol and beer and wine. And anytime you're talking about alcohol, that's where it came from. You did alcoholic fermentation. You basically took a yeast and you cut off its oxygen supply, and it'll start doing alcoholic fermentation in an effort to generate these ATPs, the 2 ATP per glucose. If you're a human, though, we can't survive on lactic acid fermentation for very long. So what we do is we get down to this place, we get down to pyruvic acid, which if you'll remember is just split in half glucose. You call it pyruvic acid. We can take that pyruvic acid and with a little bit of modification we can dump it into the aerobic process of full respiration, the steps of full respiration, the first step being the Krebs cycle. So we can take pyruvic acid, dump it into the Krebs cycle, and by the end of the Krebs cycle, coupled with electron transport and chemiosmosis, we end up generating an additional 34 ATP. For a total, this route gives us 36 total ATP per glucose. That's a much better energy to return than without oxygen. So we like to follow that route if we can. So aerobic respiration is the most efficient. We get the most ATP per glucose. Okay, next. What do we got here? Oh, yeah, anaerobic respiration, you're only getting 2 ATP per glucose. Aerobic respiration, though, kablamo, you get 34 ATP made. So aerobic respiration is by far the preferred method of extracting energy from glucose. Okay, the arrow